My recent graduate lawyer also said my argument was too emotional. Well, when your own parent does not have your back and instead goes behind your back to tell delusional lies to harm your reputation and effectively cut you off from family, it's an emotional issue. When your backstabbing parent uses those same delusional lies as an excuse to divert money you needed for simple survival and had more claim to than the people who received it, it's an emotional issue. When you're looking at spending every day of the remainder of your life one major unplanned expense away from financial or physical disaster, it's an emotional issue. My family and I live in the world's deadliest country for road fatalities involving motorcycles. We use a motorcycle because we cannot afford a car. Besides thinking of the horrifying accident videos on the news every day and lying awake thinking about them every night, I have to think about not just my own future medical expenses, but those of my wife and child as well. Do I buy a car and not have money for a medical emergency? Or do I keep money for a medical emergency and every day risk death for me and my family by being hit on our motorcycle by a car, truck, or bus? Emotional? Yes. My young attorney seems to have missed something in my communications with her. Either she assumed that as a former university English instructor, I am conversant only with grammar and poetry, or her law school days led her to believe only the law can determine what knowledge is, what logic is, and what ethics are, and no one outside the law can have any idea about ethics, logic, or epistemology. It's been 30 years since my undergrad major in philosophy, but I've continued to read about those areas and taught tertiary students about writing logical and ethical arguments. I did not, in correspondence with my attorneys, specifically state certain actions by my father or his cousins were good or bad, right or wrong, but it should have been evident that there are major moral, ethical issues in my case as plaintiff. Is what my father did good or right, or in keeping with the moral responsibility of no small importance? Was it good or right for his second cousins to take a quarter of the assets, considering the fact of my life and considering how immensely and indefinitely their doing so has harmed and will harm my family? Do my father's second cousins have a moral, ethical obligation to repay money to which they had little claim, a la Banks versus Goodfellow, money that will be needed for our health and safety in the future? I don't suppose a young lady lawyer with just a few years' experience worries much about financial disaster in late life. Another interesting quote from a web article about narcissists and money. Quote, "The narcissist will not stop victimizing others, i.e., disrupting their lives, leaving them without monetary means, and causing them unbearable distress and worry." End quote. Sounds like the author of that webpage knew my father. The simple facts are these. Because of my financially very unrewarding career in 30 years in higher ed, I had just 2 years when I earned $25,000. The rest of the time I earned less than $12,000. And because of having an uninsured medical condition requiring several daily medicines and frequent trips to the doctor, ER, or even hospital stays over that same 30 years, I have never been able to build and keep any savings as even people with far less education than I have been able to do. My financial worth at 50 was zero. Add to this my father's actions of diverting major monies, which could have alleviated those everyday concerns, to people who have nowhere near the precarious future my family and I have, and the mere act of those people taking that money can accurately and simply be described as taking from someone who has less. Moral nihilism probably has no comment on such facts, but other metaethical schemata, such as teleology, deontology, quality ethics, evolutionary ethics, would likely find the situation questionable. Again, contemporaneous writings associated with Banks versus Goodfellow mention in several places moral responsibility, moral law, moral faculties, and moral sense. Yet, when I pointed out the facts to my lawyer, she says I'm using an emotional argument. In fact, I'm feeling muzzled by the law and prevented from educating my father's second cousin of the magnitude of the harm his greed, his dishonesty, and his ignorance have caused and will cause my family. Even today, he's probably blissfully ignorant of the issues and sleeps soundly at night, thinking that the law's myopic point of view will absolve him of any legal obligation to pay back the money, perhaps even offering the out of filing for bankruptcy, though I should be the one to file for bankruptcy. Meanwhile, I have to remain silent with the knowledge that he has or should have a moral ethical obligation to pay back what was in reality a bribe by my dying father to get him and his wife to sit by his deathbed and tell him every last waking minute he was a kind, thoughtful, generous, good-hearted man, even though they didn't know the truth of what he was doing.